A billionaire comes across a homeless woman with her young daughters begging for change at a Burger King drive-thru. But when he stops his car to listen to them, everyone starts to cry. The late afternoon sun bore down on the asphalt of the parking lot as Emily held the small, sweaty hands of Emma and Olivia. Sophia, the baby, only 1-year-old, slept fitfully in her arms, secured by a makeshift cloth that had once been a curtain. Sweat rolled down Emily's face, mingling with the tears she desperately tried to hide from her daughters. "Mommy, my tummy hurts," Emma whispered, her blue eyes fixed on the bags of food passing through the drive-thru window. Her innocent comment cut Emily's heart like a knife. It had been almost 36 hours since her daughters had eaten anything, besides a few crackers donated by a stranger. The drive-thru was bustling that late afternoon. Luxurious cars crawled along in line, their occupants enjoying the cool comfort of air conditioning. The tempting aroma of burgers and fries filled the air, causing Olivia's stomach to growl audibly. She clung tighter to her mother's hand, as though seeking comfort. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. Just 4 months earlier, she'd had a job as a secretary, a modest but cozy apartment, and her daughters had never gone to bed hungry. Now here she was on the verge of doing something she never imagined in her worst nightmares. "Stay here, my princesses," she murmured to the girls, positioning them near the drive-thru exit. Emma, even at just 4 years old, showed a heartbreaking awareness of their situation, clutching her sister's hand with a determination that made Emily's heart ache. Their dresses, once cheerful and colorful, were now faded and stained, silently telling the story of their downfall. With Sophia still asleep in her arms, Emily began her painful quest. "Please, sir, my daughters haven't eaten in 2 days," she pleaded. Her voice choked with emotion as she approached a red sports car. The driver didn't even glance away from his phone, simply pressing the button to raise the tinted window. Every reaction felt like a knife to her already shattered pride. Some people pretended not to see her, others rolled their eyes impatiently. An elderly woman mumbled something about lazy people who don't want to work, as if Emily hadn't sent out hundreds of resumes in the past few weeks. "Mommy!" Olivia's desperate scream tore through the air like lightning. Emily spun around to see her 3-year-old lying on the ground, her little legs scraped by the scorching asphalt. Olivia's piercing wails woke Sophia, who started whimpering, forming a chorus of despair that drew curious and judgmental glances from the customers in line. Emily rushed to help Olivia, her own knees burning as she knelt on the sweltering asphalt. Tears now flowed freely down her cheeks as she tried to calm 3 children at once. The rough ground hurt her feet through her worn-out sandals, a constant reminder of how her life had fallen apart. Emma, showing a maturity no 4-year-old should ever have, came up to her mother. "Don't cry, Mommy. We can share a bottle of water," she said, pointing to the half-empty one they had. Emily felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. How could her little one be so strong? The scene was one of misery Emily had never dreamed she'd experience. Emma's once golden hair, which she had always braided so carefully, was now tangled and lifeless. The colorful bows Olivia loved so much had been lost weeks ago. And Sophia, her baby, was thinner than she should be, her formerly chubby cheeks now less pronounced. In the pocket of the one dress she had left, Emily carried only a few coins, nowhere near enough to buy even a small package of crackers. Her stomach growled from hunger, but the pain of watching her daughters in this situation was infinitely worse. Guilt and powerlessness threatened to choke her with every passing minute. A group of teenagers passed by, laughing and filming with their phones, likely to post on social media. Instinctively, Emily pulled her daughters closer, trying to shield them not just from hunger, but from a world that seemed to have lost all empathy. Still crying, Sophia began seeking her mother's breast, a reflex that broke Emily's heart, for her weakened, starving body hadn't produced milk for weeks. The noise of cars, people talking, and the restaurant equipment seemed to amplify the isolation and despair that surrounded them. Emily looked up at the sky, seeking strength somewhere above. The sun was beginning to set, painting the horizon in orange shades she used to admire in another life. One more car approached the drive-thru, and she knew she had to try again. For her daughters, she would face any humiliation, endure any trial. With trembling legs and a heavy heart, Emily braced herself for yet another attempt. The future was clouded by uncertainty, but one thing she knew for sure. As long as she drew breath, she would fight to give her 3 girls a better life, even if that meant standing there at the fast food drive-thru with the last shreds of her dignity hanging by a thread of hope. A sleek black BMW rolled up beside Emily, the hum of its premium engine barely audible. The tinted window rolled down slowly, revealing a man of around 40, dressed in an impeccably tailored Italian suit. His dark brown eyes, initially indifferent, locked onto Emily's desperate gaze, and something in his expression shifted. "Please, sir," Emily began shakily, the words she had repeated dozens of times that day, threatening to choke her again. But before she could continue, Sophia started crying in her arms, a weak, tired cry that exposed her utter exhaustion. Michael Harrison observed the scene for a few seconds. His eyes scanned the 3 girls, lingering on Olivia's scraped knees and the tear tracks on Emma's dirty face. Something about that image touched him deeply, stirring memories he preferred to keep buried. Emily hesitated, years of cautionary tales about strangers echoing in her mind. But Sophia's cries and the hungry looks in Emma and Olivia's eyes weighed more than any fear. Gently, she helped her girls into the back seat of the car, the contrast of the Italian leather stark against their worn-out clothes. At the nearest hotel restaurant, seated at a discreet table in the corner, Emily held a trembling cup of tea as she watched her daughters devour plates of pasta. Michael remained silent, his gaze shifting between the family and the window overlooking the city. "My husband, Thomas," Emily began, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was an accountant at a construction firm. He found irregularities, fake documents, money being diverted." She paused, taking a sip of tea to steady herself. "He decided to report it. We thought it was the right thing to do." Michael leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. As a corporate lawyer, stories like this weren't unusual, but he usually heard them from the opposite side of the negotiation table. "They set him up," Emily went on, her hands gripping the teacup tightly. "Forged documents turned up on his computer, fake emails. Before we even knew what was happening, the police were at our door. The first tears began to fall, silently. Thomas was arrested 4 months ago. We tried to fight, but we had no money for a decent lawyer. The public defense attorneys barely looked at the case." Sensing her mother's tears, Emma got up from her chair and gave Emily a tight hug. "Don't cry, Mommy. Daddy will come back," she said with a 4-year-old's innocent certainty. Michael felt a twinge in his chest watching them. "We lost everything," Emily continued, holding Emma close. "First the apartment, then the car. I tried to keep my job, but with 3 small daughters and no one to watch them," her voice caught. "No one wants to hire a secretary who has to bring her kids to work." Michael looked at Sophia, sleeping on her mother's lap, a piece of bread still clutched in her tiny hand. Olivia kept eating, her watchful eyes darting between her mother and the stranger who'd helped them. "How long is his sentence?" Michael asked, his professional tone masking the growing empathy he felt. 5 years, Emily replied, more tears rolling down her cheeks. "But he's innocent, I know he is." "Thomas would never. He always taught our daughters to value honesty and the truth." Michael pulled a handkerchief from his suit pocket and offered it to Emily. As he watched her wipe away her tears, his mind was already racing. In 15 years of corporate law, he'd encountered plenty of similar stories, usually from the perspective of large companies. But something about this family's broken dignity touched him in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. "I'm a lawyer," he finally said, startling Emily. "I specialize in corporate law." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "If you'll allow me, I'd like to review your husband's case." Emily stared at him, her tear-reddened eyes widening in a mix of hope and distrust. "Why?" she asked, instinctively holding Sophia tighter. "Why would you help us?" Michael glanced at the window, watching the city lights come on in the twilight. For a moment, he saw his own reflection in the glass, expensive suit, luxury watch, all the symbols of success he'd collected over the years. And for the first time in a long while, he felt uncomfortable with what he saw. "Because maybe it's time I do the right thing," he answered, more to himself than to Emily. Turning back to her, he added, and because your daughters remind me of someone I knew long ago." Emma, still holding her mother, smiled at Michael, a pure, unguarded smile. Olivia, having finished her pasta, watched him with childlike curiosity. In that moment, something shifted inside him, as though a long-closed door had begun to open. "I can't promise miracles," he said, pulling out his business card, "but I promise to examine the case carefully, and in the meantime," he paused, taking his wallet out of his pocket, "I'll help you find a safe place to stay with your daughters." Emily began to protest, but Michael raised his hand gently to stop her. "Think of it as an investment in the future. When your husband is proven innocent, you can pay me back if you want." Emily's tears took on a different quality, no longer pure despair, but a faint hope beginning to bloom. Michael realized that, for the first time in years, he felt genuinely alive, as though awakening from a long, indifferent slumber. The waiter discreetly presented the bill, which Michael paid without even glancing at the total. As he watched Emily gather her daughters to leave, he had the distinct feeling that this chance encounter at the drive-thru might be the start of something far greater than he could yet comprehend. "Tomorrow," he said, standing up, "come to my office at 9. We'll start working on Thomas's case." He paused, glancing at the girls. "And this week, let's find a suitable apartment for you and the kids." Guiding them to the restaurant's exit, Michael realized his life had changed irrevocably that evening. The cold, calculating corporate attorney was giving way to something different, something he thought he'd lost long ago, his own humanity. Emily's day began before sunrise. In the tiny boarding house room she'd managed to rent by the day, she woke up at 5 in the morning, taking advantage of the quiet to organize the little they had. The cramped space, containing only one double bed for all 4 of them, smelled of damp and showed water stains on the walls. But it was better than nights on the street. "Wake up, princess," she whispered to Emma, the oldest, who was always first to rise. The girl opened her eyes slowly, already accustomed to the routine. While Emily got Sophia and Olivia ready, Emma folded the thin blanket they all shared, a little warrior of 4 who had grown up far too fast. Breakfast, when they had it, was usually made up of day-old bread from a nearby bakery, picked up at closing time. The owner, a kind, older woman, often set aside leftover loaves for them. "Children shouldn't go hungry," she'd say, her eyes welling up each time she saw the girls. The first hours of the morning were spent at the downtown traffic lights. Emily had learned it was the best time to approach people, executives on their way to work, sometimes moved by the sight of a mother with 3 small children so early in the day. She'd developed a 6th sense for who might help, usually women, especially those who also had children in the car. "Mommy, that lady always gives us something," Olivia would whisper, pointing to a teacher who passed by every day at 7:30. The little one had already memorized faces and schedules, an ability born of the struggle to survive. Emily's heart tightened each time she realized how her daughters were adapting to life on the streets. The scorching midday sun forced them to seek shelter. They found refuge in the public library, where Emma was fascinated by children's books she couldn't yet read. The librarian pretended not to notice when Sophia whimpered from hunger and would sometimes forget her packed lunch on a nearby table. "Look, Mommy, it's our story," Emma would exclaim, pointing to illustrations in fairy tales about princesses who faced hardships before a happy ending. Emily swallowed her tears, wondering if her own daughters would get their happily ever after. Afternoons were spent at fast food drive-thrus. Emily had discovered that people tended to be more generous when they were about to buy a meal. Maybe guilt over spending on fast food in front of someone who hadn't eaten. She had a careful approach, keeping her children at a safe distance but still visible enough to evoke compassion. Protecting the girls was her absolute priority. Emily had devised a code with Emma. If she said time for a hug, it meant they had to leave immediately. This worked for when drunk people wandered too close or when some aggressive police officers appeared. Olivia learned to grab her sister's hand without question, and even Sophia, so young, seemed to sense when she needed to be quiet. "Don't accept anything from strangers without showing it to me first," Emily reminded the girls daily. Even in dire need, she kept strict rules about safety. She always carried a bottle of water and some bread in a worn-out bag. She'd learned the hard way that hunger could make her daughters vulnerable to bad intentions. Bathrooms were a particular challenge. Businesses often drove them out, and public restrooms were too dangerous for small children. Emily had a mental map of safe places, a diner where the restroom attendant took pity on them, a church that stayed open during the day, a shopping mall where they could blend in with the crowd and escape the security guard's notice. "Mommy, why did that lady cover her nose?" Olivia asked one day, after seeing a woman make a disgusted face at them. Emily felt her cheeks burn with shame. She kept her daughters as clean as possible, washing their clothes by hand each night in the boarding house sink. But days on the street left marks no amount of soap could hide. Meals were a patchwork of donations and leftovers. Some people offered food instead of money, which Emily gratefully accepted. She'd learned how to split a single burger 3 ways and always saved a piece for later. Sophia, still a baby, was the priority. Emily often went hungry herself to make sure the youngest had enough. "Look, Mummy, I found a coin," Emma would exclaim sometimes, her eyes shining at the discovery. Emily taught her how to look for dropped coins, turning it into a game that was, in reality, another survival tactic. Every penny was carefully stashed in a small plastic container, her emergency fund. At night, back in the tiny boarding house room, Emily counted what little she'd collected that day. On good days, it was enough to pay for the room and buy some crackers. On bad ones, she had to choose between a roof over their heads or food for their stomachs. Bathing the girls was a sacred ritual, no matter how tired they were. Emily boiled water in the one pot she owned because the boarding house's shower barely worked. She would wash their golden hair with the cheapest soap she could afford, trying to preserve the dignity that the streets tried to strip away. "Tell us a story, Mommy," Emma would ask every night once they were settled in the narrow bed. Emily invented tales of warrior princesses who protected their sisters, of guardian angels disguised as ordinary people, of better days to come. Sometimes, after the girls had fallen asleep, she would allow herself to weep silently, her tears blending with whispered prayers. Street violence was a constant threat. Emily learned to recognize the signs of danger. Groups of young men approaching, cars that drove by too slowly, eyes that lingered on them a second too long. She mapped escape routes in every place they frequented, always ready to scoop Sophia into her arms and run with Emma and Olivia. "Why is that man yelling at us, Mommy?" Olivia once asked after a store owner chased them away from his doorway. Emily swallowed her humiliation, explaining that some people were afraid of what they didn't understand. But deep down, each insult, each contemptuous look, each gesture of disgust was a new wound in her soul. Nights were the hardest part. The fear of street violence mixed with fear of tomorrow, fear she couldn't protect her daughters, fear she'd failed as a mother. Emily slept on high alert, waking at the slightest noise, her body placed instinctively between the door and her children. Yet in the midst of hardship, there were also small moments of grace. Like when Emma made Sophia laugh with silly faces, or when Olivia found a lone flower growing through a crack in the sidewalk and saved it to decorate their little corner at the boarding house. These small joys were treasures Emily held onto, reminding her that even in darkness, the love of her daughters was her strength and salvation. Begging had become their reality, but Emily refused to let it define them. She kept her dreams alive, teaching her daughters that their current situation was temporary, that better days would come. And now, with Michael's offer of help, for the first time in months, Emily let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the happy ending from her bedtime stories wasn't just a fairy tale. The GPS on the BMW indicated destination ahead on the right, but Michael found it hard to believe this shabby building was really the right address. The boarding house, a narrow 3-story structure with peeling paint and cracked windows, looked completely out of place compared to the upscale corporate district where his office was located. He parked, instinctively adjusting his Patek Philippe watch, a nervous gesture that had betrayed his discomfort for years. "Room 37, 3rd floor," he repeated Emily's directions under his breath. The stairs creaked under his expensive Italian shoes as he climbed, the smell of mold and old food hanging in the dimly lit hallway. A child cried somewhere, the sound echoing through the corridors. Emily awaited him at the door, Sophia on her hip as always. The contrast between his $10,000 suit and the mildew-stained walls didn't go unnoticed. "Sorry about the mess," she murmured, embarrassed, as she let him in. The room was smaller than his closet. A single double bed took up almost all the space, with an old suitcase serving as a makeshift wardrobe. Emma and Olivia sat on the floor, playing with scraps of paper they had turned into dolls. "All of you sleep here?" Michael asked, unable to hide the shock and compassion in his voice. Emily just nodded, straightening a patched sheet over the bed. Michael pulled out his phone and discreetly took pictures of the room, the water stains on the walls, the communal bathroom in the hallway, the single pot on an improvised hot plate. Each photo was another piece of the puzzle forming in his mind. "We need to document everything," he explained, noticing Emily's questioning look. "For the case, but also for social services." He paused, watching Emma show Olivia how to make a sturdier paper doll. "Do you have all your paperwork? The girls' birth certificates?" Emily rummaged through the worn-out suitcase and pulled out a yellowed plastic folder. "This is everything I managed to save," she said, handing over the documents. Michael noted her hands trembled slightly. While reviewing the papers, Michael typed notes into his tablet. Birth certificates, the girls' medical documents, even some old photos of a happy family in front of a modest apartment. The transformation was shocking. "I'll set up a meeting with Dr. Clara at Social Services later today," he said, carefully placing the documents back. "She's tough but fair. More importantly, she hates when big companies manipulate the judicial system." Emma approached Michael timidly, offering him one of her paper dolls. "This is for you," she said with a shy smile. "It's a guardian angel, just like Mommy says in her stories." Michael took the delicate paper doll, feeling a pang in his chest. In 15 years of corporate law, he'd earned a reputation as a ruthless shark. How many families like Emily's had he inadvertently helped destroy for the sake of corporate profit? "I need to make some calls," he said, rising to his feet. Out in the hallway, away from the family's gaze, he allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. Taking out his handkerchief, he dabbed at his eyes, surprised by his own emotion. 3 hours later, back at his top-floor office in the city's most prestigious commercial building, Michael stared at his computer screen. A preliminary report on Emily's situation blinked before him, alongside the first documents he'd gathered for Thomas's case. "Cancel my meetings for the next 2 weeks," he instructed his secretary via intercom, "and contact the real estate agency. I need a fully furnished apartment available for immediate lease in an upscale area." His decision was made. This wouldn't be just another pro bono case to ease his conscience. He would go all in, using every resource and connection he had. The corporate shark now had a new target, the corrupt system that had ruined this family's life. On his desk, Emma's little paper angel lay beside an empty photo frame. Michael placed it carefully inside the frame, letting it serve as a reminder, a moral anchor for the task he was about to undertake. "Janet," he called his secretary again, "call my accountant. I'm setting up a foundation. And schedule a meeting with our private investigation team for tomorrow morning." As night fell over the city, Michael organized his strategy. First, he had to get Emily and her daughters out of that boarding house, urgently. Next, assemble a team to reinvestigate Thomas's case from scratch. Finally, begin a parallel investigation into the company that had framed him. His phone buzzed, a text from his ex-wife reminding him of a weekend charity gala. Michael glanced at the paper angel again and typed a brief reply, "I can't make it. I have a more important commitment." The next day, a Friday, Michael arrived at the boarding house at 8 a.m., carrying bags of breakfast and a folder of documents. He'd slept only 4 hours but felt more energized than he had in years. "We have a lot of work to do," he announced, as Emma and Olivia gleefully dug into the fresh bread and hot chocolate. "But first, we're getting you out of this place." Emily began to protest, but Michael raised his hand gently. "It's not charity," he explained. "It's an investment. When we prove Thomas's innocence, you can pay me back with interest if you like." As he watched them eat breakfast, likely the first decent meal they'd had in days, Michael felt a new certainty take hold in his chest. This wasn't just another case. It was his chance for redemption, to use his privilege and knowledge to truly change someone's life. The little paper angel in his pocket, now carefully laminated to last, had become his talisman. A reminder that guardian angels sometimes appear in unlikely forms, even in the form of a cynical corporate lawyer who'd finally found his cause. The Santa Clara Homeless Center was unlike anything Emily had imagined. Rather than the bleak municipal shelters she feared, with their communal dorms and strict rules, this place was warm and inviting, run by an NGO in partnership with the foundation Michael had just created. "Let's start with the documentation," said Sophia, a social worker guiding Emily and the girls down a bright corridor. The smell of fresh coffee and baked bread hung in the air, making Olivia's stomach growl loudly. The intake room had soft-colored walls and toys scattered in one corner, a deliberate strategy to help children feel comfortable during the bureaucratic process. Emma immediately gravitated to the dollhouse, leading Olivia by the hand, while Sophia dozed quietly in her mother's arms. "We need to get fresh copies of all your paperwork," Sophia explained, typing quickly on her computer. "Birth certificates, ID cards, social security numbers, work permits." She paused, noticing Emily gripping the edge of her chair nervously. "Don't worry about the costs. The foundation is covering everything." Emily's eyes filled with tears as Sophia began taking her photo for the new documents. How long had it been since she'd seen herself in a proper mirror? Her face looked thinner than she remembered, deep circles under her eyes telling the tale of sleepless nights. "Now let's take care of you," Sophia announced after 2 hours of forms and procedures. She led Emily and the girls to a residential wing of the center, where a small apartment awaited them. It was simple but clean and welcoming, with 2 beds, a private bathroom, and a little kitchenette. "First, a bath," Sophia said kindly, handing Emily a kit with soap, shampoo, and fresh towels. "I've left clean clothes on the bed. After you're settled, lunch will be served." That first hot shower in weeks felt almost sacred. Emily cried silently while washing her daughter's hair, watching the murky water flow down the drain, as if washing away not only dirt, but also part of the nightmare they had lived. "Mommy, smell my hair now," Emma exclaimed, breathing in its clean scent. Olivia spun in front of the mirror, delighted with her new dress, while Sophia, clean and comfortable, slept more peacefully than she had in a long time. Lunch was served in a communal room where other families in similar situations were also recovering. It was a simple but nutritious meal: rice, beans, roast meat, and fresh vegetables. Emily watched her daughters eat hungrily, a lump in her throat as she realized how long it had been since they'd had a proper meal. "We'll need to do a full checkup on all of you," said Dr. Ricardo, a volunteer physician who came to examine them after lunch. His gentle demeanor calmed even Sophia, who usually cried with strangers. Initial test results confirmed Emily's worst fears. They were all underweight and showing signs of malnutrition. Sophia had early-stage anemia, and Olivia needed dental work, but with proper nutrition and care, it could all be reversed. "You need to take care of yourself too," the doctor insisted, noticing how Emily prioritized her daughter's needs over her own. "You can't help them if you're not strong." Later that afternoon, while the girls napped, Emily had her first session with the center's psychologist. Diana was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and an extraordinary ability to listen without judgment. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to voice her deepest fears. "I thought I'd failed as a mother," she confessed, tears streaming freely. "That I didn't deserve my kids because I couldn't keep them off the streets." "You didn't fail," Diana said firmly. "In fact, you've kept your daughters together, safe and loved under the hardest circumstances possible. That's not failure, Emily. That's strength." The days that followed brought a routine that gradually added color back to their lives. The girls started attending the on-site daycare during the day, allowing Emily to join job training workshops. Her hands, calloused from scrubbing laundry in a boarding house sink, now learned to use a computer. 1 week after arriving, Emily barely recognized her daughters. Emma and Olivia had both gained weight, their cheeks regaining the rosy glow of childhood. Sophia, with a proper diet and medical care, was catching up to milestones expected for her age. "Look, Mommy," Emma called one afternoon, showing her mother a drawing she'd made at daycare. No longer just paper dolls, but a bright, happy family under a sunny sky. This is us in our new home. At night, lying in a clean, comfortable bed, Emily allowed herself to dream again. Michael called every day to update her on Thomas's case. Evidence of his innocence was surfacing, and for the first time in months, the future didn't look so frightening. "Tell me a story, Mommy," Olivia asked, as she always did before bedtime. But this time, Emily didn't need to invent tales of warrior princesses or guardian angels. She could finally share a true story. How sometimes help comes from unexpected places, and how in the darkest nights there is always a light of hope waiting for dawn. As her daughters slept, Emily stayed awake a while longer, listening to their gentle breathing. There were no leaky walls in this room, no cockroaches scuttling about. The only crying she heard was occasional and distant, no longer the cry of despair, but simply the normal sounds of children being children. On the bedside table, their new documents were stacked neatly. They weren't just pieces of paper, but the first step toward regaining dignity, identity, and citizenship. Next to them lay a small calendar where Emily marked off the days until Thomas's next hearing. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Emily felt they were on the right path. They were no longer invisible, no longer just a statistic among the homeless population. They were a family rebuilding itself, step by step, day by day, thanks to the help of people who still believed in offering a hand to those in need. Emily watched her daughters play in the small courtyard of the Santa Clara Center, her thoughts drifting to a past life that felt like someone else's story. Sitting on a bench under a tree, she allowed herself to recall the days before everything fell apart. She had graduated with honors in executive administration, making her parents, solidly middle class, so proud. Her first job was as an administrative assistant at an insurance brokerage, where her efficiency and dedication soon caught the attention of her supervisors. That was where she met Thomas, a newly hired accountant with a gentle smile and shy demeanor that won her over from the start. Their romance was quick and intense. 6 months later, they were engaged, and 6 months after that, married. They rented a small but comfortable apartment, furnishing it bit by bit with carefully chosen sale items. Emily smiled at the memory of how proud they were of their first new refrigerator, bought on a 12-installment plan. Thomas eventually landed a better job at a mid-sized construction company, the same firm that would later destroy him. Emily moved up in the brokerage, eventually becoming an executive secretary to upper management. They planned each milestone carefully, always thinking about the future. Their daughter Emma was planned too, as was the purchase of a used car that allowed them to move to a slightly bigger apartment. "Let's do everything by the book," Thomas always said, creating spreadsheets for their expenses and savings. They built up a small nest egg that later sustained them in the first months after his arrest. When Olivia came along, though unexpected, she was welcomed with joy. The apartment they financed over 25 years was a dream come true, even with the hefty monthly payments. The first cracks in their well-structured life showed up when Thomas was promoted to supervisor of the finance department. At first, it was thrilling. More money, more responsibilities, a chance to provide a better life for the girls. Sophia had just been born when he noticed the irregularities. "Something's off with these numbers," he'd say at night, poring over spreadsheets. Emily grew worried, noticing his increasingly dark circles and restless sleep. Thomas had always been meticulous about finances, and his integrity was his greatest pride. The decision to blow the whistle came on a Sunday night, after the girls were in bed. "It's the right thing to do," Thomas insisted when Emily voiced her fears. "What kind of example would we set for our daughters if we just looked the other way?" The process moved quickly, but not in the way they'd hoped. Within weeks, Thomas was summoned to a meeting with upper management. That very day, the police showed up at their apartment. Forged documents had appeared on his computer. Bogus emails indicated he masterminded a large-scale embezzlement scheme. Emily had to quit her job to care for the girls. Thomas was in jail, and they had no nearby relatives. Their savings evaporated under the costs of lawyers who promised much but delivered little. The car was the first to go. Then Emily sold her jewelry, including their wedding bands. Losing their finance department was the hardest blow. Without being able to keep up with the payments, they watched their dream of homeownership slip through their fingers. Moving to a smaller rented apartment was just the beginning of a downward spiral. Emily tried working as a cleaning lady, bringing the girls along, but most homeowners balked at the idea of 3 small children underfoot. The bills piled up: water, electricity, rent. Each one felt like a sentence, each due date a form of torture. The last month in that rented apartment was the worst. They had to choose between food and utility bills. They chose food and were evicted. The first night on the street was the hardest to remember. Emma, then 3, couldn't understand why they couldn't go home. Olivia cried from the cold, and Sophia, still a baby, needed diapers Emily could barely afford. They slept in a park, huddled together on a bench. Emily wrapped around her 3 daughters like a lioness guarding her cubs. Those early days of begging were the most humiliating. Emily, who had always been so proud of her independence, now found herself asking for food in restaurants, collecting cans to sell, accepting worn clothes from strangers. Every refusal, every look of disgust, every slammed door was another wound to her dignity. She tried municipal shelters a few times, but they were overcrowded and rife with stories of violence and families being split up. She preferred sleeping on the street, keeping her daughters by her side, rather than risk losing them to the system. Meeting Michael at the Burger King drive-thru wasn't her first attempt at seeking help there. For weeks, she'd been watching the ebb and flow of customers, figuring out the busiest times and which patrons seemed most likely to offer help. It was a heartbreaking approach, but at least it felt safer than some alternatives. Now, sitting on that bench at the Santa Clara Center, Emily watched Emma teaching Olivia to draw a hopscotch grid with sticks. Sophia waddled nearby, steadier with each new day. Their fall from middle-class stability to homelessness had taken less than 6 months, a brutal, rapid descent. "What are you thinking about?" asked Diana, the psychologist, sitting down beside her. "How fast life can change," Emily replied, wiping away a stubborn tear. "How you can lose everything in a matter of months, even when you haven't done anything wrong." Diana nodded with understanding. "And how you can rebuild, with the right help at the right time." Emily agreed, her eyes fixed on her daughters. Their story wasn't unique. She had met other families at the center with similar trajectories. The only difference was the spark that triggered the downfall: a serious illness, job loss, a traumatic divorce, or an injustice like the one they'd suffered. But now, for the first time in a long while, Emily allowed herself to dream of starting over. With Michael's help and the center's support, they could not only survive but truly live again. And maybe someday their story would help others not to lose hope, even in the darkest moments. During her next session with Diana, Emily finally articulated the exact moments that marked her descent into poverty. It was like walking down a spiral staircase, each step leading to a new level of desperation she'd never thought possible. The first blow came with a call from the HR department at the brokerage. "I'm sorry, Emily, but with your family situation..." The manager's voice trailed off, saying without saying that nobody wanted an employee whose husband was facing fraud charges. The dismissal was packaged as a friendly settlement, with all rights paid. But the stigma lingered, invisible yet suffocating. Her parents, retired and living on modest pensions out of state, couldn't help beyond their weekly phone calls of concern and well-intentioned but impractical advice. "Come back home, honey," her mom would plead, not grasping that home was a nebulous concept now, especially with Thomas facing criminal charges in the city. Emily's older sister, Sarah, initially offered help. "You can stay with us for a few weeks," she said, but later retracted the invitation after her husband expressed worries about the bad influence it might have on their own children. The last phone call from Sarah was short and painful. "I have to think about my family first, Emily." The severance pay ran out sooner than expected. Lawyer fees ate up every extra cent, and daycare for the girls was an impossible expense. Emily tried freelancing from home, doing secretarial work online, but it was nearly unfeasible to focus on tasks while caring for 3 small children alone. "Ms. Emily?" The landlord's voice still echoed in her memory. "This is 3 months later." The eviction notices started mild and polite, then turned into official warnings. The last month in that apartment was spent in darkness. Power had been cut off, and they had to bathe in cold water. Selling their furniture was a gradual, painful process. First, the non-essentials, the TV, the microwave, the living room shelf. Then came the basics. The stove was traded for a hot plate, the refrigerator sold to pay off lingering debts. Each item taken away felt like another piece of her dignity disappearing. "Mommy, why are we selling my dolls?" Emma asked, her big eyes filled with an understanding far beyond her years. Emily couldn't bear to explain that the money from those toys would feed them for a few more days. The cruelest moment arrived when they had to decide what to take as they left the apartment. One suitcase. That was all they could manage. Clothes, documents, a few diapers for Sophia, and whatever toys remained. Everything else stayed behind. The rubble of a life that felt more distant by the day. Their first nights on the street were a brutal shock. Cold, fear, hunger. But even worse was how people looked at them. Not the pitiful looks, those also stung, but the judgmental ones, as though their situation was the product of personal failings rather than systematic injustice. "Are we ever going back home?" Olivia would ask each night before bed in yet another makeshift spot. Emily lied, saying yes, even as that possibility seemed to slip further away each day. Small, odd jobs barely covered basic needs, washing car windows at red lights, selling candy on the train, squeegeeing windshields. Each attempt to earn honest money was hindered by people's prejudice and distrust. Who would trust a woman with 3 little girls and no address? The social services system proved a Kafkaesque maze of bureaucracy and humiliation. Without a fixed address, many benefits were out of reach. Public shelters, always full, had dire conditions and the constant risk of separating the children. Their health began to decline. First came the constant colds, then intestinal infections from spoiled food or contaminated water. Sophia developed a chronic cough that kept Emily awake at night, feeling helpless without the means to take her daughter to a doctor. The lowest point came on a rainy night huddled under the awning of a closed store. Emma had a high fever, and Emily cried silently, praying to any god who might listen. That was the night she realized they'd hit rock bottom. The drive-thru became her last hope, not by choice but by elimination. It was relatively safe, with a steady flow of cars and occasionally people who offered leftover food. Emily never imagined she'd find her lifeline in Michael, a man who seemed to appear out of nowhere, right there in that place of despair. Now, recounting her story to Diana at the shelter, Emily understood that her family's fall wasn't just about losing material possessions. It was about losing her identity, her dignity, her hope. But it was also about discovering a resilience she never knew she had, about keeping her daughters united and safe in the worst possible conditions. "Do you know what kept me alive?" she asked Diana, watching her daughters play in the yard. "The certainty that as long as we stayed together, there was still hope. Even at our worst, we were still a family." The move to a temporary apartment happened on a Monday morning. Michael had insisted on a furnished place in a safer, centrally located neighborhood near schools and public transportation. For Emily, who had gotten used to carrying her entire life in one suitcase, the idea of having a home again felt almost surreal. "Is this our new castle, Mommy?" Emma asked, her eyes shining as she took in the small 2-bedroom apartment. Olivia ran from room to room, exploring every corner with childish excitement, while Sophia watched curiously from her mother's arms. The first few days were an adjustment. Emily caught herself hoarding leftover food, a habit from life on the street that would take time to break. The girls took a while to understand that they no longer had to share a single plate and that there was enough for everyone. "You need to allow yourself to start over," Diana advised in one of her weekly therapy sessions. The shelter continued to offer support even after Emily moved into the apartment. The transition isn't just physical, it's emotional too. A routine formed. Mornings meant daycare for the girls, a partner institution through the reintegration program. Emily used that time to attend vocational courses offered by the shelter. Her hands, once roughened by the hardships of the street, now learned to type quickly, manipulate spreadsheets, and refresh her secretarial skills. "Mommy, look what I learned today." Emma came home every day with new drawings, songs, or vocabulary. The education she'd been denied on the streets now flourished. Olivia, always shy, started making friends, while Sophia's physical and mental development soared with proper nutrition and stimulation. The kitchen cupboards, once empty, gradually filled with groceries. Emily learned to manage the financial aid she received from the program, making every cent count. Monthly grocery shopping became an exercise in planning, a stark contrast to the days when she had to think only about the next meal. "You're making great progress, Sophia," the social worker told Emily during a follow-up visit. Emily had started an internship at a partner company 3 days a week while the girls were at daycare. The pay was modest, but it was the first step toward independence. Evenings were peaceful, no longer filled with fear. Lying in her own bed, an actual bed, not a piece of cardboard on the ground, Emily listened to her daughter's soft breathing in the next room. The apartment's silence felt comforting, a world away from the constant noise of the street. Michael remained a constant presence in their lives, though more discreet. His weekly visits brought not just updates on Thomas's case, but a sense of security Emily had forgotten existed. The girls called him Uncle Michael, and his once stony lawyer's gaze always softened around them. "You have to forgive yourself," Diana said in a particularly intense therapy session, where Emily admitted feeling guilty for exposing her daughters to life on the street. "You didn't fail as a mother. You kept them alive, safe and loved under impossible circumstances. The nightmares still came some nights, dreams where they were back on the street, hunger and cold their constant companions. Emily would wake up in a panic, needing a moment to realize that life had changed, that the streets were behind them. The process of rebuilding was slow but steady. Emily started keeping a journal, recording each small triumph: her first internship paycheck, the first birthday party she could organize for Emma since leaving the street, the first medical checkup showing they were all healthy. "Sometimes I feel like I don't deserve any of this," she confessed to Sophia one day during a social work appointment. The social worker smiled kindly. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Emily. What matters is what you do with it." Mondays took on new significance. It was the day Emily sent progress reports to the program, detailing her course achievements, the girls' development, goals met, and new ones set. Each report was a tangible reminder they were moving forward. The most visible transformation was in the children. Emma, now regularly attending school, was devouring books with surprising eagerness. Olivia, once so silent, sang songs from daycare all around the apartment. Sophia was saying her first words, finally catching up to the milestones for her age. "Remember when we used to make paper dolls, Mom?" Emma asked one night, playing with a real doll she'd gotten from daycare. "We don't have to do that anymore, right?" The innocence of her comment brought tears to Emily's eyes. The closet, once holding just a few threadbare clothes, began to fill with garments for each occasion: school uniforms, work clothes for Emily, pajamas for everyone. Each new item was a symbol of the renewed life they were building. Weekly visits to the prison to see Thomas took on a new atmosphere. Emily brought pictures of the girls at school, their excellent grades, Olivia's artwork, and stories of everyday triumphs. "We're building a home for you to come back to," she told him, holding his hand across the prison visit table. "The hardest part," Emily told Diana in therapy, "is accepting that I deserve this second chance, that I'm not a failure because I needed help." Diana nodded empathetically. "Accepting help isn't weakness, Emily, it's wisdom." Friday nights became special, family meeting, as Emma called it. Sitting around the kitchen table over a simple but lovingly prepared meal, each person would share something good that happened that week. It helped them remember that even in tough transitional times, there was always something to be grateful for. The future, once a slammed door, now offered possibilities. Emily began dreaming again about her daughter's graduations, a stable career for herself and Thomas's return. Dreams that had seemed impossible now started to feel within reach. "You're not that same person who was living on the streets," Diana reminded her one session, "but you don't have to pretend it never happened. It's part of who you are now, part of your strength, your ability to survive." And so, day by day, step by step, Emily and her daughters walked the path of reconstruction. Their transition wasn't just from the street to a home, from hunger to abundance, or from fear to safety. It was a journey of rediscovery, of learning to trust in life again, reclaiming what they'd been forced to abandon but were now determined to regain. The morning sun poured through the windows as Michael turned the key in the door. Emily held Sophia in her arms, Emma and Olivia clinging to her legs in a mix of excitement and nervousness. The door swung open to reveal a space that seemed straight out of a dream. "Go on in," Michael said softly, noticing Emily's hesitation. "This is your place now." The three-bedroom apartment in an upscale neighborhood was bigger than anywhere they'd lived, even in better times. The spacious living room, bathed in natural light, was fully furnished with new sofas, a big flat-screen TV, and a dining table that could comfortably seat 6. "Mommy! Mommy! The kitchen is huge!" Olivia shouted, the first to break the stunned silence. She dashed off to explore, her small feet pattering on the immaculate tile floor. The modern kitchen, with its brand-new appliances, gleamed under the morning light. Emma stayed close to her mother, her wide eyes taking in every detail. "Is all this ours?" she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might make it vanish. Emily nodded, unable to speak as silent tears slid down her cheeks. "Come see the bedrooms," Michael said, leading them down the hallway. The first room, decorated in pink and lavender, had 2 twin beds with floral comforters and a desk. "This one's for Emma and Olivia," he explained. Olivia bounced onto one of the beds, laughing at the feel of the soft mattress. Emma approached more cautiously, stroking the clean sheets as though they were made of gold. A small bookshelf with children's books and a few new toys completed the space. "And this," Michael added, opening the door to the next room, "is Sophia's room." A white crib adorned with colorful mobiles stood atop a fluffy rug. Emily placed Sophia inside, watching her baby explore the new surroundings with curiosity. The main bedroom, meant for Emily, had a queen-size bed with a pale blue bedspread and matching nightstands. A large wardrobe occupied one wall, and a small reading chair stood by the window. "There's a spot for everything," Emily murmured, still stunned by the drastic change in their lives. The hallway bathroom had glass doors and cabinets for toiletries, and the ensuite bathroom even had a bathtub, a luxury Emily never dreamed of having. The girls began exploring every corner of the apartment, squealing in delight at the little details: drawers filled with new clothes in their sizes, neatly arranged school supplies, educational toys suited to each age. "The fridge and cupboards are fully stocked," Michael said, showing them the kitchen now equipped with everything they might need. "It should be enough food for at least 2 weeks." Emily opened the fridge and had to lean on the counter, overwhelmed. Fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, milk, yogurt, things she hadn't seen in months. By late afternoon, after Michael left with a promise to return the next day, Emily sat on the new sofa watching her daughters. Emma was organizing her new books on the shelf, something she'd always dreamed of doing. Olivia was playing with a real doll, no longer paper. Sophia napped peacefully in her new crib, monitored by a baby monitor. "Mom," Emma said, settling beside her on the couch, "we don't have to be scared of the rain anymore, right?" The innocent question broke something inside Emily. She hugged her daughter, finally letting herself sob openly for the first time that day. Dinner was prepared in the brand new kitchen with fresh ingredients and proper cookware. The sound of real silverware clinking against porcelain plates was like music. The girls sat at the dining table, each in her own seat, no longer sharing one plate on the floor. Bath time felt almost surreal. Hot water flowed from the shower without needing to be boiled in a pot, and the towels were plush and soft. Emily washed her daughter's hair with proper kids' shampoo, not the harsh bar soap she'd used before. "Look, Mommy, there's room for all our clothes," Olivia exclaimed, helping put away the new outfits in the wardrobe, clothes sorted by size, color, and function, which felt like pure luxury compared to the single suitcase they'd been living out of. That night, after tucking each daughter into her own bed, Emily walked through the quiet apartment, touching the walls to confirm they were real. The sense of security was almost palpable. No street noises, no drunk shouting, no constant fear. In the kitchen, she opened the fridge again, still marveling at the sheer abundance. She poured herself a glass of fresh milk, cold, no longer the rationed powdered kind, and took it to her bedroom. Sitting in the reading chair, she gazed at the city lights outside. The apartment smelled of newness, freshly painted walls, clean linens, a real home. Gone was the musty odor of the boarding house, the stench of the streets. Each room had its own light fragrance: lavender in the bathroom, vanilla in the kitchen, the scent of clean laundry in the bedrooms. In her bedroom, Emily discovered new professional clothes for job interviews, casual clothes for everyday wear, and even a dress for special occasions. One drawer contained new lingerie and soft pajamas, small luxuries that represented the restoration of her dignity. Stretching out on her own bed, with clean sheets and plump pillows, Emily let the reality of her new situation wash over her. Her tears were now tears of gratitude and relief and hope. From the next room, she could hear Emma and Olivia's soft breathing. The baby monitor showed Sophia sleeping soundly. For the first time in months, Emily felt she could truly rest, knowing her daughters were safe and warm. The future was still uncertain, with Thomas behind bars and plenty of challenges ahead. But on that first night in her new home, Emily let herself believe the worst was truly behind them. This apartment wasn't just a roof. It was a symbol of a new phase in their lives. The first week of their new life revolved around medical checkups. Dr. Ricardo, recommended by Michael, saw the family at his private clinic for a thorough evaluation. Emily watched anxiously as each daughter underwent detailed tests, revealing the toll of months on the street. Sophia is anemic and underweight, the doctor explained, reviewing the results. But with proper meals and supplements, she'll bounce back quickly. He prescribed vitamins and a special diet for the baby, assuring Emily that Sophia's developmental delays would be overcome in time. Olivia urgently needed dental care. Weeks without proper brushing had led to several cavities. Pediatric dentist Dr. Anna proved incredibly patient, turning each visit into a fun experience to ease Olivia's fears. Emma, the strongest of the three, surprisingly showed signs of anxiety. "It's normal," the child psychologist explained. She took on a lot of responsibility for her age. Weekly therapy sessions helped Emma rediscover her inner child. Meanwhile, Emily tackled the bureaucratic process of updating their documents. Sophia, from social services, accompanied her through a maze of offices and agencies. They acquired new copies of everything: birth certificates, IDs, social security numbers, and work permits. Each newly issued document restored a bit of their lost identity. "Now you officially exist again in the system," Sophia joked, handing Emily the last piece of paperwork. Emily smiled, recalling how many doors had been slammed in her face when she lacked these simple documents. Registering the girls in school proved to be a particularly emotional milestone. Their private school fees were covered by Michael's foundation. In addition to quality academics, the school provided psychoeducational support for vulnerable children. "Mommy, look at the uniform," Emma squealed, spinning in front of the mirror in her pleated skirt and white blouse. The new uniform, complete with the school crest, meant more than just clothing. It was a symbol of restored normalcy. Emily also began rebuilding her own education. Michael insisted on enrolling her in an evening program for executive assistants with a focus on technology. She took classes 3 nights a week, made possible by a trustworthy babysitter who stayed with the girls. "You're capable of more than just entry-level work," one of her professors encouraged her, upon seeing her dedication to advanced Excel and administrative management. Emily absorbed the new knowledge eagerly, understanding that education was her ladder to a better life. Weekends were reserved for self-care activities, aiding in emotional recovery. On Diana's recommendation, Emily made time for small personal gestures, an occasional haircut, a manicure to care for nails damaged from hard labor, even light exercise in the park with the girls. "Mom, you look prettier," Olivia observed one morning, watching Emily get ready for class. The innocent comment brought tears to her eyes. She couldn't remember the last time she felt pretty, or even worth caring for. New projects surfaced naturally. Emily discovered a knack for organizational tasks that went beyond typical secretarial work. In her entrepreneurship classes, part of the same program, she developed the idea for a consulting business aimed at reorganizing small offices. "You understand what it's like to rebuild from scratch," her professor commented, reviewing the proposal. "That perspective can really help businesses restructure. The girls thrived in their own creative pursuits. Emma devoured books, encouraged by her teachers to join a kids' reading club. Olivia immersed herself in art, her vibrant paintings brightening the apartment walls. Even Sophia, catching up on lost time, surprised her therapist with rapid developmental leaps. The apartment itself became a testament to their renewed lives. Drawings were proudly displayed on the fridge, and Emily kept a meticulously organized schedule pinned to the corkboard. Their bookshelf began filling with reading materials, from children's stories to professional manuals. Potted plants now graced the windowsills, bringing a touch of life to their new home. "You're putting down roots," Diana observed during a therapy session when Emily mentioned starting a small herb garden on the balcony. Not just physically, but emotionally too. The closet, once home to only a few pieces of clothing, now told a story of progress. Emma's and Olivia's school uniforms, Emily's professional wardrobe for her internship, and casual wear for their growing social life. Each piece was chosen carefully, part of the ongoing exercise of reconnecting with who she was. During their weekly prison visits to see Thomas, Emily would now bring photos of the girls in uniform, their excellent report cards, or Olivia's award-winning art projects. "We're building a life for you to return to," she'd tell him, holding his hand through the plexiglass partition. Michael still dropped by every week, less for financial matters, more to mentor Emily professionally and to be a paternal figure to the girls. He watched each bit of progress with unconcealed pride. "I've noticed you don't talk about surviving anymore," Diana commented in their last monthly session. "Now you talk about living." Emily paused, realizing how true that was. Her thoughts no longer circled around trauma, but turned toward the future. In a small notebook, Emily started listing her goals: finish the executive assistant program, enroll in an online college degree, launch her reorganization consulting venture, and build her own emergency fund. Dreams once deemed impossible now evolved into tangible targets. The reconstruction wasn't just external but internal. Emily saw it in the confident smile Emma wore as she made new friends at school, in Olivia's relaxed posture during dental checkups, and in Sophia's joyful leaps toward each new milestone. "You know what's most important?" Emma asked one evening while they worked on homework together. "We're not just living in a new place, we're really living." And indeed they were. The transformation went far beyond having a roof, or official documents, or school enrollment. It was about recovering dignity, rebuilding self-esteem, and learning to dream again. It was about turning a physical space into a home, a course into an opportunity, and a fresh start into a rebirth. Michael sat in his office, surrounded by piles of documents his investigative team had gathered in recent months. On his computer screen glowed a complex diagram linking names, companies, and dates. Thomas's case was revealing deeper layers than Michael had initially suspected. "Look at this," he said to Emily, who sat across from him. "We found suspicious transfers months before Thomas discovered the irregularities." He swiveled his monitor so she could see the scanned documents. Emily leaned in, studying the numbers carefully. Her years of experience as an executive assistant had honed her eye for financial details. Those dates, that's exactly when Thomas started acting quieter at home, more worried. The investigation had uncovered a bigger scheme than simple embezzlement. The construction company where Thomas worked was just the tip of the iceberg. Behind it lay a complex web of shell companies and fronts, moving millions through inflated contracts. Thomas wasn't the first to spot trouble, Michael explained, pulling out a folder. There were 3 other employees before him. All of them were fired for cause after raising alarms. He spread out photographs of people who'd gone through the same systematic destruction. Emily recognized one name: Carlos Mendez. He worked with Thomas. "He just disappeared one day. Nobody knew what happened." Her hands shook as she clutched his photo. Michael's investigative team had pieced together a clear pattern. First, incriminating documents were planted on the so-called problem employee's computer. Then an internal audit exposed their involvement in fraud. Finally, that person was not just fired, but had their entire professional reputation annihilated. "They're methodical," Michael said, flipping through more documents, "but they've made mistakes. The files planted on Thomas's computer have metadata proving they were created after the alleged dates. We also found evidence of unauthorized remote logins. Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she remembered the night the police raided their apartment. Now, months later, the pieces were finally falling into place. That's why they acted so fast. Thomas was getting too close to the truth. The investigation also revealed that her family's downfall hadn't been accidental. It was carefully orchestrated. Even Emily's firing wasn't coincidental. They found emails proving the brokerage was pressured externally to let her go. They wanted you completely isolated, Michael explained. No job, no support, no resources to fight back. He pointed to more documents, phone records, coded emails, suspicious bank transfers, a paper trail exposing the extent of the conspiracy. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she absorbed each detail. The freezing nights, the hunger, the pain, none of it had been mere bad luck. It was all part of a deliberate plan to silence someone who'd tried to do the right thing. We found this among the company's archives, Michael said, holding up a particularly disturbing document. A list of potential problems, employees like Thomas, who'd shown excessive concern about certain financial transactions. The investigation also brought surprising allies. Some current employees, still inside the company, began passing information anonymously. Documents left in agreed-on drop spots, pen drives mysteriously showing up at Michael's office. "People are tired of living in fear," read one anonymous email. What they did to Thomas opened everyone's eyes. Michael had hired IT forensics experts who tirelessly recovered deleted files and traced unauthorized access points. Each new finding strengthened Thomas's case and revealed how extensive the corruption ran. "Look at this," Michael said, revealing a complex data chart. Every time an employee questioned a suspicious transaction, there was a pattern of late-night system logins from the same IP address. Emily recognized some of the dates. They coincided with nights Thomas had mentioned peculiar numbers in the ledgers. He knew something wasn't right, but not exactly what. The investigation also unearthed unsettling political connections. The construction company held multi-million-dollar contracts with public agencies, all with inflated budgets. The scheme crossed into multiple spheres of power, explaining how the police managed to act so quickly against Thomas. "That's why his trial moved so fast," Michael said. "They had people in high places who expedited everything. But that'll also be their downfall. They left evidence everywhere." Emily examined a timeline Michael had put together. She could see how each blow to her family had been carefully orchestrated. Her dismissal, their eviction, even certain shelters turning them away. It all fit into a larger plan. "They never thought you'd find help," Michael noted. "The plan was total destruction, make an example of you." But the plot backfired. Emily's story of a mother and 3 children thrown onto the streets for exposing corruption was beginning to circulate in the financial world. Other similar cases came to light, forming a pattern that could no longer be ignored. "We're not just building Thomas's defense," Michael explained. "We're building a case against the whole scheme. Once we're finished, it won't just clear his name. It'll blow the lid off the entire system." Emily felt a swirl of emotions seeing the mounting evidence. Rage at what they'd endured, relief at finally understanding why, hope that justice might prevail. But she was also afraid. The people behind this were powerful and wouldn't hesitate to strike again. "Don't worry," Michael reassured her, noticing her anxiety. "You have protection now, and most importantly, you have the truth on your side." Each day brought new revelations as the investigation peeled back layer after layer. Every unearthed document, every new witness, every recovered file strengthened Thomas's case and exposed the corruption he'd tried to fight. "Soon we can file for a formal review of his conviction," Michael said, organizing the files on his desk. "And this time they can't hide the truth." Emily left his office that afternoon with a new understanding of her journey. Her family's nightmare wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was the direct result of a corrupt system that needed to be exposed. And at last, they had the means to do just that. The conference room at Michael's firm was silent as he projected a series of confidential emails onto the wall. Emily, seated between him and his legal team, could hardly breathe as she read the messages exchanged between top executives at the construction company. "We need to shut Thomas down immediately," read one email, dated 3 days before his arrest. "He's digging too deep into the 2023 records. If he connects the dots on Project Aurora, the whole scheme goes down." Michael clicked to the next slide, a tangled web of banking transactions. "We traced over $50 million in missing funds," he explained. This operation was way larger than Thomas ever imagined. Their investigation had uncovered a systematic pattern of fraudulent bids, overcharging for construction projects, and money laundering. Project Aurora, which Thomas had begun to investigate, was just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it lay a vast network of corruption reaching into multiple areas of power. "Check this out," Michael said, highlighting a set of documents. Not only did they fabricate evidence against Thomas, they had an entire unit devoted to creating issues for employees who asked too many questions. The files outlined a step-by-step plan to ruin anyone labeled a threat. Emily recognized many names, people like Carlos, Marina, and Ricardo, co-workers who had also vanished after raising suspicions. All of them tried to expose wrongdoing. All of them were systematically destroyed. The big break in the case came from an unexpected source. A former IT specialist at the construction firm, driven by guilt, handed over an external hard drive containing backups of years of internal communications. "I can't carry this burden anymore," he wrote in his confession. "What they did to Thomas and his family was inhuman." "We finally have irrefutable proof," Michael announced, projecting a crucial document. It was an email detailing the entire plan to frame Thomas, explicit instructions on which files to plant on his computer and how to alter their metadata. Emily couldn't stop the tears as she read the cold, calculated words. "After he's arrested, make sure his family is left with nothing. No job, no support, no resources to fight. Let them serve as an example to anyone else who tries to expose us." Michael's team had worked tirelessly for months, building an airtight case. Digital forensics experts recovering deleted files, tracking unauthorized logins, reconstructing the entire conspiracy timeline. "It's not just about proving Thomas's innocence," Michael explained. "It's about exposing an entire network of corruption that's ruined countless lives." Their motion for a review of Thomas's criminal case was nearly ready. Hundreds of pages of evidence, witness depositions, and forensic analyses were meticulously compiled, showing not only that Thomas was innocent, but that he was deliberately targeted. "There's more, Michael said, opening a sealed folder. "We uncovered proof the judge who sentenced Thomas took illegal payments through a shell company." The evidence was staggering: bank statements, wire transfers, and coded emails. A damning paper trail proving that Thomas's conviction had been rigged from the start. "We're filing the motion for review tomorrow," Michael announced. "And at the same time, we're handing everything over to the Attorney General's office and federal authorities. The operation already has a name: Operation Aurora." Emily gazed at the stack of documents on the table, tangible proof of the injustice that had torn her family apart. Every page was another piece of the puzzle, revealing not just her husband's innocence, but the web of corruption that had targeted them. "How long?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly. "How long until Thomas can come home?" Michael hesitated. "With the evidence we have, especially the proof that the judge was bribed, we might get an immediate release order in a matter of days. The full review process could take months, but Thomas won't have to wait in prison." The news hit Emily like a wave. After so many months, the possibility of having Thomas home, of her daughters having their father back, felt almost unreal. "But we need to be cautious," Michael cautioned. "The people behind this are powerful. They won't go down without a fight. That's why we've coordinated a media release. Once this story breaks, it'll be too big to cover up." His team had prepared a complete dossier for the press, with every piece of evidence carefully organized and verified. Investigative journalists from multiple outlets were ready to publish simultaneously. "The main point," Michael said, "is that we're no longer just proving Thomas's innocence. We're showing that he was deliberately persecuted for doing the right thing." Emily flipped through some of the evidence: screenshots, financial reports, printed emails. Each document told a piece of the story of how her family had been systematically destroyed for daring to stand up against corruption. The girls, Emily began, thinking of Emma, Olivia, and Sophia. They'll finally understand why it all happened. That their father is a hero, not a criminal. Michael nodded. And, more importantly, other families won't go through what you did. This case will change a lot of things. The sun was starting to set when the meeting concluded. Emily left the office with a folder of documents, real proof that the truth would finally come to light. That evening at home, she watched her daughters playing in the living room. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a complete future. A future with Thomas at home, with justice served, with truth winning out. Soon, very soon, she whispered to herself, clutching the folder to her chest. Their long night of injustice was finally ending, and the dawn of truth was just around the corner. The courthouse was packed when the judge struck his gavel for the last time. I hereby declare the previous sentence null and void, and order the immediate civil and criminal rehabilitation of the defendant, Thomas Anderson, he pronounced, his voice echoing throughout the chamber. Emily, seated in the front row with the girls, couldn't hold back her tears. The ruling wasn't just a legal victory. It was the official restoration of everything they'd lost. The subsequent civil case for damages was equally groundbreaking. The construction firm was ordered to pay a massive sum, not just for material losses, but for the emotional trauma inflicted on the family. It doesn't erase what we went through, Thomas said later, at home, cradling Sophia on his lap as she dozed, but it lets us rebuild our lives on our own terms. Emma and Olivia, snuggled beside him, were still getting used to having their father around again. The compensation opened doors that once seemed impossible to unlock. Emily and Thomas decided to invest part of the money in a project inspired by their own experience, a foundation to support families in vulnerable situations, especially those harmed by systemic injustices. Let's call it Project New Beginnings, Emily suggested in a planning session with Michael, who had become both trusted friend and advisor. His law firm would serve as a major partner. The foundation started with free legal assistance, but quickly expanded to offer psychological support, professional training, and educational help. Emily took the role of executive director, channeling her personal story into a driving force to help others. "Mommy, look who's here," Emma squealed one day, running to the door. It was Maria, one of the first beneficiaries of the project, visiting with her son for a tutoring session. Emily and Thomas's apartment, now larger, more welcoming, often hosted families helped by the program. Thomas found his own path to redemption. After turning down multiple job offers from big companies, he opened an independent consultancy focused on ethics and compliance. "We'll help businesses do the right thing from the start," he said, "so no one else has to go through what we did." The girls thrived in their improved environment. Emma, who finally had access to a robust education, became a top student with a passion for social justice. Olivia expressed herself through art, her bright paintings showcasing themes of hope and perseverance. Sophia, too young to remember the worst days, now grew up surrounded by the love and determination that had kept them going. "I still have nightmares sometimes," Emily admitted to Diana in one of their last therapy sessions. "But now I wake up and know we're safe, and that we're making a difference." Reconciling with extended family was a gradual process. Her sister Sarah was the first to reach out with a heartfelt apology. "I should have believed you," she said tearfully, hugging Emily. Her aging parents moved closer, eager to reconnect with their granddaughters. This new era brought not just material prosperity, but deeper personal growth. Emily discovered a well of inner strength she never knew she had, and became a respected non-profit leader. Thomas learned to cherish life's simple moments, finding purpose in guiding businesses to uphold ethical standards. "You two are stronger than you realize," Michael told them during the launch party of the foundation's main office. "You turned a tragedy into hope for others." The apartment Michael had arranged for them in the early days was repurposed into transitional housing for families in crisis, a way of honoring the beginning of their own recovery journey. Sunday evenings became special, a sacred time for the family to come together, share stories, and plan for the future. During one such gathering, Emma spoke up with unexpected news. "I want to be a lawyer, like Uncle Michael. I want to help people the way he helped us." Her statement brought tears to everyone's eyes. It was proof that even the most painful experiences can bear fruit when transformed into a calling. Project New Beginnings grew beyond anyone's expectations. In its first year, it had already helped 100 families move out of crisis. Each success story was a small victory against the system that had nearly destroyed the Andersons. "We aren't just survivors," Emily declared at a fundraiser event. "We're change makers." Their redemption came not only in the form of legal or financial restoration, but in their ability to turn their story into hope and support for others. They realized their greatest wealth wasn't in the reclaimed resources, but in the unbreakable bond that had carried them through the darkest times. Thomas began giving talks at universities on corporate ethics, using his own story to illustrate the consequences of corruption and the value of integrity. His personal experience gave his words weight and authenticity. "Daddy's a real hero," Olivia said one day after watching him speak. "He chose to do the right thing even when it was really hard." Healing was still a daily process. Sometimes the memories of those grim months weighed heavily, but they had the tools and support to work through it. Family therapy became part of their routine, a safe space to reflect on the past and strengthen their bond. The Anderson story, as it was known, sparked major reforms in both the justice system and the corporate world. New laws were proposed to protect whistleblowers, and companies began adopting tougher compliance measures. "You didn't just get your life back," Michael said at the second anniversary of the foundation's launch. "You created a legacy that will keep helping people long after this story fades from the headlines." And so, day by day, the family continued their path of redemption, not as victims of an unjust system, but as protagonists of a story of resilience and transformation. Their example inspired others never to lose hope, even in the darkest moments. 5 years had passed since that afternoon at the Burger King drive-thru. The garden of the Andersons' home was adorned with decorations for a special celebration, the 5th anniversary of Project New Beginnings. Under the soft, twinkling lights wrapped around the trees, dozens of families gathered, each with its own story of triumph over adversity. Emily, elegant in a navy blue dress, looked on through tears as Emma, now 9, played a piano piece for the guests, a talent she never would have discovered in the days they spent on the streets. 8-year-old Olivia proudly displayed her paintings in a makeshift gallery. 6-year-old Sophia dashed among the guests, handing out smiles, blissfully unaware of the hardships she'd once faced. "I can never thank you enough," Emily said, walking up to Michael and Thomas, who stood chatting near the pool. Michael, now very much a part of the family, gave her a modest smile. "You've done far more for others than I ever did for you," he said, gesturing at the crowd of guests. Project New Beginnings had become one of the largest charitable organizations in the country, helping thousands of families escape crisis. Thomas, now a respected consultant on corporate ethics, pulled Emily into a hug. His firm specialized in implementing compliance programs for large companies, using his own history as a lesson on what happens when integrity is forsaken. "Hey, look who's here," Emma announced, sprinting toward the entrance. It was Maria, one of the first people they'd ever helped, arriving with her family. Once a homeless single mother, she was now a regional coordinator for Project New Beginnings. Her transformation was just one among hundreds. Their home, in one of the city's nicest neighborhoods, was more than just a symbol of new social standing. It was a haven for people in need. Its doors were always open to anyone seeking help. "Remember our first night here?" Thomas asked Emily as they watched the gathering. They'd moved into this larger house 2 years earlier to accommodate the foundation's expanded operations. The girls couldn't believe they'd each have their own bedroom. All around the garden, guests mingled, each family with its own story of overcoming the odds. Former street dwellers who had become entrepreneurs, single mothers who had completed college degrees, children who, like Emma, had discovered hidden talents once suppressed by poverty. Michael stepped onto a small stage set up in the garden and asked for everyone's attention. "Today we celebrate not just 5 years of Project New Beginnings," he began, "but the power of the human spirit to transform pain into purpose." Emily let her tears flow freely as Michael recounted their first meeting at the drive-thru. Emma and Olivia, seated in the front row, listened wide-eyed, as it was their story too, even if the younger ones couldn't fully recall it. But the real miracle, Michael continued, wasn't just taking a family off the streets, it was how this family chose to use their second chance to create opportunities for others. Project New Beginnings had become a model for social assistance. In addition to free legal aid and counseling, it offered vocational training, childcare for working moms, temporary housing, and educational support for children. "Mommy," Sophia tugged at Emily's dress, "tell me again about the guardian angel who saved us." That was how the girls saw Michael, an angel who appeared when they needed him most. The celebration lasted well into the night. There was music and dancing and laughter, the kind of sweet sounds you cherish all the more when you know what it's like to endure the silence of despair. Children played in a specially arranged area, their giggles echoing through the garden. "We're announcing the international expansion," Thomas revealed during dinner. Project New Beginnings was set to open branches in other Latin American countries. Families need help everywhere. Emily watched her daughters interact with other children in the program. Emma, aspiring to become a lawyer like Michael, had a special knack for welcoming newcomers. Olivia used her art to help children cope with trauma. Even Sophia, so young, was already showing the same warm-hearted spirit that defined their family. Their elevated social status was measured not by material wealth alone, but by the impact they had on others. Their home often served as emergency lodging. Thomas's office offered internships to teens in the program. Emily spent much of her time mentoring other women. "Sometimes I still have to pinch myself," Emily confessed to Michael, watching the festivities. "To believe all this is real," Michael smiled, recalling the desperate woman he had encountered years earlier. "You always had that strength in you, Emily. You just needed a chance to show it." The night ended with a special performance. A choir made up of children from the project, including Emma and Olivia. Their voices carried through the garden, singing about hope and new beginnings, about the strength that emerges from hardship. As the guests started to leave, Emily gathered her family for a photo. They called Michael over. He was family, after all. In the background, the garden lights created a magical glow, as if reflecting the miracles their lives had become. "So, what's next?" Thomas asked, putting his arm around Emily as they watched the last guests depart. "Now," she replied with a smile, "we keep writing our story and help others do the same." The future lay wide open before them, filled with endless possibilities. Their scars had become marks of wisdom, their story of hardship a source of inspiration, and there, under the same stars that once served as their only roof, the Anderson family celebrated not just their own redemption, but the certainty that hope can always be found, even in the darkest night. 5 years on, the path they had walked was clear, from the drive-thru of a fast food joint to a life where they were not just surviving, but thriving, lifting others in the process. And in that final truth lay the real victory: compassion, justice, and the unwavering belief that no matter how bleak the night, dawn was always on the horizon.